My wife forged my signature to give our fully paid off house to her pregnant sister, so I faked a massive tax audit and left her completely broke. I'm 34 years old, and I honestly believe that the most terrifying villains in the world do not break into your house through the window. They have a key to the front door and they sleep right next to you every single night. I don't know why I didn't see the massive glaring red flags earlier in our relationship. When I met my wife Olivia about 7 years ago, she seemed incredibly grounded and sweet. But her family was an absolute, completely toxic nightmare. Olivia had a younger sister named Chloe. Chloe was 28 years old and the absolute undisputed golden child of their family. Chloe had never held a real job. She bounced around from one deadbeat boyfriend to the next, completely relying on their mother to fund her expensive lifestyle. Whenever Chloe made a massive mistake, their mother would completely guilt-trip Olivia into bailing her out. Over the years, I watched Olivia drain her own personal savings account to pay off Chloe's massive credit card debts and cover her exorbitant rent when she inevitably got evicted. I stayed completely out of it. We kept our finances entirely separate, except for one massive, incredibly important joint asset: our house. I work as a senior forensic financial auditor for a massive global accounting firm. My entire career is dedicated to tracking hidden corporate assets, uncovering massive tax fraud, and dismantling complex financial crimes. Because I work incredibly demanding 80-hour weeks, I make a very high corporate salary. Exactly 4 years ago, I used the vast majority of my savings to purchase a beautiful, custom-built 5-bedroom house on 3 private acres of land. I put down a massive initial payment, and over the next 3 years, I worked myself to the absolute bone to pay off the remaining balance. Exactly 8 months ago, I made the absolute final payment. The massive $850,000 estate was completely entirely paid off. No mortgage. No massive bank loans. It was our completely free and clear sanctuary. But our absolute peace was completely shattered about 4 months ago. Chloe got pregnant. Her current boyfriend, who worked part-time at a local bar, immediately panicked and completely abandoned her. Chloe was left entirely alone, completely broke, and living in a tiny, cramped one-bedroom apartment that their mother was paying for. Instead of telling Chloe to grow up and get a job, their mother decided it was time for a massive family intervention. My mother-in-law invited herself over for Sunday dinner. She sat down at my beautiful custom dining room table, drank a glass of my expensive wine, and proposed the most absolutely insane, deeply entitled idea I have ever heard in my entire natural life. She looked me dead in the eyes and completely demanded that Olivia and I simply gift our fully paid off 5-bedroom house to Chloe. I honestly thought it was a completely ridiculous joke. I actually laughed out loud, but they weren't joking. My mother-in-law kept her face entirely stern. She said that because Olivia and I didn't have any children yet, we were being incredibly selfish by hoarding such a massive property. She told us we should just move into a nice 2-bedroom luxury apartment downtown and let Chloe raise her baby in the massive house because she needed the space and the stability. I stopped laughing immediately. I put my fork down, looked at my mother-in-law, and told her absolutely, unequivocally no. I told her I had worked 80-hour weeks for 4 entire years to pay off that property and that I was not handing a nearly $1 million asset to a 28-year-old child who refused to work. My mother-in-law started screaming at me, calling me a completely heartless monster. Chloe started sobbing at the table, playing the absolute victim. But the most terrifying part of the entire evening was Olivia. My wife didn't defend me. She didn't tell her family they were being completely insane. She just sat there looking down at her plate in absolute terrifying silence. I kicked my mother-in-law and Chloe out of the house that night. I thought the incredibly stupid conversation was completely over. I thought they were just entitled, desperate people making a completely ridiculous demand. I had absolutely no idea that Olivia had already decided to completely betray me. Exactly 3 months went by. The tension in the house was incredibly thick, but Olivia stopped bringing up her sister, so I just assumed the situation had completely blown over. Because I am a forensic auditor, I routinely run massive background checks and property tax audits for my corporate clients. On a quiet Tuesday afternoon, I was sitting in my downtown office, waiting for a massive database query to finish running. Just out of pure, absolute boredom, I typed my own residential address into the county's public property tax registry just to make sure the automated tax payments had cleared for the quarter. The digital page loaded on my secondary monitor. I looked at the legal owner line, and my heart instantly stopped beating. The blood literally turned to absolute ice in my veins. The registered legal owner of my massive, fully paid off $850,000 house was no longer my name. It wasn't Olivia's name either. The legal owner was a completely brand new, recently registered corporate entity called New Beginnings LLC. I literally stopped breathing. I sat there in my expensive office chair staring at the glowing screen. I quickly pulled up the state's corporate registry database and searched the LLC's name. The sole managing director of New Beginnings LLC was Chloe. I didn't panic. I didn't scream. My absolute forensic corporate training immediately took over my brain. I pulled the complete digitized property transfer records from the county clerk's office. I downloaded the massive PDF file and opened it on my screen. It was a standard quitclaim deed. The document officially, legally transferred the entire ownership of the massive property directly to the LLC. And at the very bottom of the final page, right next to Olivia's signature, was my signature. But I had never seen that document before in my entire life. I had never signed it. Olivia hadn't just stolen the house. She had completely, maliciously hired a shady, corrupt notary public to forge my legal signature on a massive federal real estate document. She had literally stolen a nearly $1 million asset right out from under me to secretly give it to her pregnant sister. I sat back in my chair. The absolute, unadulterated betrayal was so massive, it actually made me feel physically sick to my stomach. She thought I was just too busy working my massive corporate job to ever notice a simple piece of paper being filed at the county courthouse. She thought she could just legally steal the house, hand the keys to her sister, and completely ambush me with the reality of it when it was too late to fight back. She chose the absolute worst man on the entire planet to try and commit massive financial fraud against. I didn't call the police immediately. I didn't rush home and confront her with the printed documents. I just quietly closed the web browser, picked up my phone, and called the absolute most ruthless, terrifying real estate litigation attorney in the entire state, because I was going to completely methodically dismantle her entire life. I didn't immediately speed home to confront Olivia. I didn't scream, and I didn't break down into tears. When you work in forensic financial auditing for almost a decade, you learn that the absolute greatest weapon you can wield against a fraudster is completely weaponized silence. I took the rest of the afternoon off from my massive corporate firm. I drove directly to the absolute most expensive, ruthless real estate litigation and criminal defense attorney in the entire city. I sat in his heavy leather chair inside a massive glass conference room, and I placed the downloaded county deed right on his mahogany desk. My lawyer, a man who charges exactly $800 an hour, looked over the documents. He pulled out a magnifying glass to look at the forged signature, completely shaking his head in absolute disbelief. He told me it was one of the most incredibly stupid, easily provable financial crimes he had ever seen. He told me that because they used a corrupt notary to forge a federal real estate document, Olivia and her sister Chloe had committed massive, felony-level wire fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny. My lawyer told me we could call the police right that exact second and have them both arrested. But I looked at my lawyer and I completely shook my head. I told him I didn't just want them to go to jail. I wanted to watch their entire entitled, toxic family completely tear each other apart. I wanted them to willingly, frantically hand the house right back to me, completely destroying their own relationships in the process. I told my lawyer exactly what I was planning to do. He actually smiled, leaned back in his chair, and told me it was the most brilliantly evil trap he had ever legally sanctioned. The next morning, I went back to my corporate office. Because my entire career involves investigating massive corporate tax fraud, I have complete, unrestricted access to the exact templates, legal jargon, and formatting used by the federal government for catastrophic tax audits. I sat at my desk and spent exactly 6 hours drafting a completely fake, incredibly terrifying 80-page document. It looked absolutely 100% official. It had massive, intimidating red federal seals. It was filled with terrifying legal clauses about asset forfeiture, criminal money laundering, and immediate massive financial penalties. The fake document explicitly stated that I was currently the primary target of a massive federal investigation for corporate embezzlement. It stated that all of my personal assets, my bank accounts, and my restricted stock options were completely frozen. But the absolute most brilliant, terrifying clause I drafted was buried right on page 3. The fake federal document explicitly stated that because the government suspected me of hiding massive amounts of stolen corporate cash, they were immediately seizing my $850,000 house. And it stated that any individual or corporate entity holding the deed to that specific property was immediately legally classified as a co-conspirator in federal money laundering. The document claimed that whoever currently owned the house would be immediately indicted, face up to 20 years in federal prison, and be held personally liable for a massive, undischargeable penalty fee of exactly $400,000. It was an absolute masterpiece of psychological warfare. I printed the massive stack of papers, put them in a heavy brown folder, and I drove home to my beautiful, fully paid-off sanctuary. It was a Friday evening. Olivia was standing in our custom kitchen, listening to a podcast and chopping vegetables for dinner. She looked completely relaxed, completely happy, probably dreaming about the exact moment she was going to kick me out and move her deadbeat sister in. I walked through the front door. I messed up my hair. I completely loosened my tie, and I forced myself to hyperventilate just a little bit. I made myself look absolutely, physically terrified. I walked into the kitchen and slammed the heavy brown folder directly onto the marble island. Olivia jumped. She dropped her knife on the cutting board and looked at me, completely startled. I looked her dead in the eyes, my voice completely shaking with fake panic. Olivia, I whispered, clutching my chest. We are completely, entirely ruined. Everything is gone. She looked at the massive stack of papers with the red federal seals. Her face immediately dropped. She asked me what was going on. I told her the absolute greatest lie of my entire natural life. I told her I had made a massive, catastrophic mistake at work. I told her the federal government was auditing me for massive corporate embezzlement and that they were seizing every single penny I owned. I told her I was completely broke and that I was likely facing massive federal prison time. Olivia literally stopped breathing. Her eyes went completely wide. But then, I dropped the absolute nuclear bomb. I grabbed her shoulders, pretending to be completely desperate. And the worst part, I told her, my voice completely cracking, is the house. They are seizing the house. The federal agents told me that whoever legally owns this property right now is going to be completely investigated for criminal money laundering. Whoever's name is on that deed is going to be hit with an immediate massive penalty fee of exactly $400,000, and they will probably go to a federal penitentiary for 20 years. I swear. I actually watched the blood completely drain out of her face in real time. She went completely ghost white. She didn't try to comfort me. She didn't ask how we were going to afford a lawyer. The absolute terrifying realization that she had just legally signed her precious pregnant sister up for 20 years in federal prison and a $400,000 penalty fee completely shattered her brain. She literally stumbled backward, knocking a completely full glass of red wine off the counter. It shattered onto the hardwood floor, but she didn't even look down at it. She started stammering, unable to form a complete sentence. She told me she felt sick to her stomach. She told me she needed to use the restroom immediately. She practically ran out of the kitchen, completely abandoning me in my fake moment of absolute despair. I heard the heavy guest bathroom door slam shut, and I heard the lock click. I didn't stay in the kitchen. I walked completely silently down the hallway and pressed my ear right against the wooden bathroom door. I didn't have to strain to hear her. Olivia was literally screaming into her cell phone. She had called her mother, "Mom, you have to fix it." Olivia screamed, completely sobbing into the phone. The federal government is seizing the house. He is being investigated for massive money laundering. The government says whoever is on the LLC deed is going to federal prison and owes them $400,000. We have to give the house back. We have to get Chloe's name off the property right this exact second. I stood in the hallway, pressing my hand over my mouth to keep from absolutely laughing out loud. The trap had completely, flawlessly snapped shut. They were absolutely terrified, and they were about to willingly hand my $1 million estate right back to me just to save their own skin. I stood completely still in the dark hallway, pressing my hand tightly over my mouth to keep from absolutely laughing out loud. Through the heavy wooden bathroom door, I could hear Olivia and her mother completely losing their minds. Olivia was hyperventilating, repeating the fake, terrifying penalties I had just completely invented. She kept crying about the $400,000 penalty fee and the 20 years in a federal penitentiary. I quietly backed away from the door, walked back into the custom kitchen, and sat down at the marble island. I put my head in my hands and went right back to playing the role of the completely broken, terrified husband facing a massive federal audit. Exactly 20 minutes later, the bathroom door slowly opened. Olivia walked back into the kitchen. She looked like she had physically aged exactly 10 years in the span of half an hour. Her makeup was completely ruined, her eyes were bloodshot, and her hands were physically trembling. She walked over to me, pulled out a bar stool, and sat down. She reached out and grabbed my hands. They were absolutely ice cold. She looked me in the eyes and she spun the most absolutely pathetic, entirely transparent lie I have ever heard in my entire life. "Honey," she whispered, her voice completely shaking. "I have to tell you something. I did something a few weeks ago and I only did it because I love you and I wanted to protect our future." I looked up at her, pretending to be completely confused. She took a massive, shaking breath. She told me that she had been incredibly worried about my stressful corporate job. She claimed that she had read an article about protecting marital assets from corporate lawsuits, and she had decided to proactively protect our fully paid-off $850,000 house. And then, she actually admitted it. But she completely tried to spin it as a massive favor to me. "I transferred the deed of the house," she cried, squeezing my hands. "I formed an LLC with Chloe, and I forged your signature to move the house into her name. I just wanted to keep it completely safe from the federal government. I was just trying to be a good wife." I ripped my hands away from her. I stood up from the bar stool, and I put on the absolute greatest acting performance of my entire natural life. I yelled. I paced around the kitchen. I acted completely betrayed, screaming that she had committed a massive felony and forged my legal signature. I yelled that she had completely ruined everything, and that now the federal government was going to arrest her pregnant sister for massive money laundering. Olivia completely broke down. She slid off the bar stool and literally collapsed onto the hardwood floor, sobbing uncontrollably. She begged me to forgive her. She begged me to help her fix it. "We have to transfer it back," Olivia screamed, looking up at me from the floor. My mom is driving over with Chloe right this exact second. We called an emergency 24-hour notary. Chloe is absolutely terrified. We are going to sign the deed completely back over to you. We have to get Chloe's name off that federal document before they arrest her. I let out a massive dramatic sigh. I told her I didn't know if transferring it back would stop the federal investigators, but that I was willing to try to save her pregnant sister from going to a federal penitentiary. Exactly 30 minutes later, the heavy mahogany front door flew open. My mother-in-law and Chloe burst into my living room. The scene was absolutely incredibly chaotic. Chloe was completely hysterical. She was wearing sweatpants, holding her pregnant stomach and crying so hard she was actually choking on her own tears. My mother-in-law looked absolutely terrified, but she was still incredibly toxic. My mother-in-law didn't apologize for trying to steal my nearly $1 million estate. She actually marched right up to me and started screaming, blaming me for the entire fake federal crisis. "You brought this curse into our family?" My mother-in-law yelled, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. "You are a completely corrupt corporate criminal. You're going to ruin my pregnant daughter's life. We are signing this cursed house right back to you, and we are completely washing our hands of your massive federal mess." I just nodded my head, looking completely defeated. I told them we needed to leave for the notary immediately. We didn't ride in the same car. I drove my sedan, and the three of them piled into my mother-in-law's SUV. I watched them in my rearview mirror the entire drive to the downtown financial district. They were driving completely erratically, absolutely panicked to get the stolen asset entirely out of their names. We arrived at the 24-hour emergency notary public exactly 45 minutes later. We walked into the bright, fluorescent-lit office. The notary, a quiet, older man, looked completely confused by the hysterical, crying pregnant woman and the screaming older lady standing in his lobby. My mother-in-law had actually forced Chloe to print out a completely new, expedited quitclaim deed before they drove over. We all sat around a small, cheap folding table in the back of the office. Chloe didn't even read the document. Her hands were shaking so incredibly badly that she could barely hold the black pen. She was absolutely convinced that federal agents were going to burst through the door at any second and arrest her for massive corporate money laundering. She signed her name on the managing director line. She legally, officially transferred the completely paid off $850,000 estate out of the LLC. But this time, my lawyer had made absolutely sure of the legal wording when I texted him the plan. The deed didn't transfer the house back to me and Olivia jointly. Because they were in such a massive, completely blind panic to avoid the fake federal penalties, they used the exact legal template I had emailed Olivia while she was crying on the kitchen floor. The document transferred 100% of the absolute legal ownership, entirely, solely into my personal name. The notary stamped the document with his heavy official seal. He signed his name, officially validating the transfer. I reached across the cheap folding table and I picked up the heavy, legally binding document. I looked at the fresh ink. I felt the physical weight of the paper in my hands. The entire $850,000 estate was completely legally mine again. No forged signatures. No secret LLCs. I slowly folded the document and slid it perfectly into the inside pocket of my suit jacket. And then, the entire atmosphere in the small office completely shifted. I didn't look terrified anymore. I stopped slumping my shoulders. I completely dropped the fake, panicked breathing. I stood up from the folding chair, buttoned my suit jacket, and I looked down at my wife, my absolutely toxic mother-in-law, and her completely useless sister. I just smiled, a completely cold, absolutely terrifying smile. And then, I dropped the absolute final hammer on their entire completely fake reality. I stood up from the cheap folding chair, completely buttoned my suit jacket, and I looked down at my wife, my absolutely toxic mother-in-law, and her completely useless sister. I just smiled. A completely cold, absolutely terrifying smile. The entire atmosphere in the small, fluorescent, lit notary office instantly shifted. I didn't look terrified anymore. I stopped slumping my shoulders. I completely dropped the fake, panicked breathing. Olivia looked up at me from her chair. Her bloodshot eyes narrowed just a fraction of an inch. She could tell something was incredibly, fundamentally wrong. "Honey," she whispered, her voice shaking, "why are you smiling? We have to get home and call the federal agents. We have to tell them the LLC doesn't own the property anymore." I let out a very slow, completely calm breath. "There are no federal agents, Olivia," I said, my voice completely echoing in the quiet office. The three of them completely froze. My mother-in-law's jaw actually dropped. I looked right into Olivia's terrified eyes and I completely dismantled her entire universe. "There is no massive corporate embezzlement," I explained, keeping my voice incredibly flat and steady. "There is no money laundering investigation. There is absolutely no $400,000 penalty fee, and nobody is going to a federal penitentiary for 20 years. I made the entire thing up." Olivia literally stopped breathing. She stared at me, completely unable to process the words coming out of my mouth. I reached into my suit jacket, pulled out the heavy brown folder with the fake red federal seals, and I completely dropped it onto the cheap folding table right in front of them. I'm a senior forensic financial auditor, I told her, my voice dripping with absolute disgust. Did you honestly, truly believe you could secretly forge my legal signature on a federal real estate document, file it at the county courthouse, and I would just never notice? I found the quitclaim deed on Tuesday afternoon. I saw the forged signature. I saw the secret LLC. Chloe started crying again, but this time it was out of complete, absolute shock. My mother-in-law's face turned completely, violently purple. She realized exactly what I had just done. She realized I had just legally tricked them into handing a completely paid-off, $850,000 estate right back to me. She lunged forward, screaming at the top of her lungs. She reached across the folding table, desperately trying to grab the newly signed deed out of my inside pocket. "You tricked us!" My mother-in-law screamed, her voice completely echoing off the walls. "You are a completely sick, twisted monster. That house belongs to my pregnant daughter. Give that paper back right this exact second." I easily stepped back, completely out of her reach. "No," I said quietly. "The house belonged to me. I worked 80-hour weeks for 4 entire years to pay for it. You three decided to commit massive, felony-level fraud to steal it. So I just used your own absolute pathetic greed and terror to legally take it back. And because you were in such a massive panic, you didn't even read the new deed. You didn't transfer it back to our joint names, Olivia. You transferred 100% of the legal ownership into my sole, individual name." Olivia actually let out this massive, completely blood-curdling scream. She covered her face with her hands and collapsed forward onto the folding table. She realized she had just legally signed away half of a nearly $1 million asset that she could have fought for in a standard divorce. I looked down at her, completely shaking, sobbing form. "I am filing for divorce the exact second the courthouse opens on Monday morning," I told her. "Do not bother coming back to my house. Your expensive clothes and your bags are already sitting in black trash bags on the front porch. And if you ever, even for a single second, try to come after me for alimony or my corporate savings, I will take the original forged deeds straight to the district attorney, and I will make absolutely sure that you and your sister actually go to federal prison for real." I didn't wait for her to respond. I didn't listen to my mother-in-law's screaming. I turned around, walked completely out of the notary office, got into my quiet sedan, and I drove away. The legal fallout over the next 6 months was absolutely, incredibly brutal for her, because I held the absolute concrete proof of her massive felony forgery. Olivia didn't dare fight me in the divorce proceedings. She didn't hire an aggressive lawyer. She didn't demand a single penny of my massive corporate salary, and she absolutely did not try to claim any equity in the house. She signed the divorce papers completely quietly, absolutely terrified that I was going to send her to prison if she pushed back. She walked away from a completely paid-off, incredibly luxurious life with absolutely nothing but the clothes in her trash bags. I heard through the massive family grapevine that their entire toxic dynamic has completely exploded because Chloe didn't get the massive free house to raise her baby in. She had to move back into her mother's cramped, tiny house. Olivia, who has absolutely no savings left because she gave it all to her sister over the years, also had to move back in with their mother. They are all three crammed under the exact same small roof. A completely broke, entirely miserable family of toxic, entitled women who absolutely hate each other. Olivia has to work a terrible, low-paying administrative job just to buy basic groceries, and she blames her mother and her sister for convincing her to steal the house in the first place. As for me, I'm doing absolutely incredible. I still live in my beautiful, custom-built, 5-bedroom house on 3 private acres of land. I still work my massive corporate job, but I don't work 80-hour weeks anymore because I have absolutely zero debt. I sleep incredibly well, the house is entirely peaceful, and I have hundreds of thousands of dollars sitting securely in my private investment accounts. I learned an incredibly valuable lesson. The absolute best way to completely destroy a greedy, entitled person isn't to fight them with anger. The absolute best way is to completely weaponize their own panic, step out of the way, and watch them legally dismantle their own entire life.